Chapter 6 of The Hidden Hand. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Bridget. The Hidden Hand by E.D.E.N. Southworth. Chapter 6. A Short, Sad Story. Ah, poverty is a weary thing, it burdeneth the brain, it maketh even the little child to murmur and complain. It is not much I have to tell, began Capitola. I was brought up in Rag Alley and its neighborhood by an old woman named Nancy Grewell. "Ah!" ejaculated Old Hurricane. "She was a washwoman and rented one scantily furnished room from a poor family named Simmons." "Oh!" cried Old Hurricane. "Granny, as I called her, was very good to me, and I never suffered cold nor hunger until about 18 months ago, when Granny took it into her head to go down to Virginia." "Umph!" exclaimed Old Hurricane. "When Granny went away she left me a little money and some good clothes, and told me to be sure to stay with the people where she left me, for that she would be back in about a month. But, your honor, that was the last I ever saw or heard of poor Granny. She never came back again, and by that I know she must have died." "Ah!" breathed the old man, puffing fast. "The first month or two after Granny left, I did well enough. And then, when the little money was all gone, I eat with the Simmonses and did little odd jobs for my food. But by and by Mr. Simmons got out of work, and the family fell into want, and they wished me to go out and beg for them. I just couldn't do that, and so they told me I should have to look out for myself." "Were there no customers of your grandmother that you could have applied to for employment?" asked the Recorder. "No, sir. My granny's customers were mostly boarders at the small taverns, and they were always changing. I did apply to 2 or 3 houses where the landladies knew Granny, but they didn't want me." "Oh!" groaned Major Warfield, in the tone of one in great pain. "I wouldn't have that old fellow's conscience for a good deal," whispered a spectator, "for, as sure as shooting, that gal's his unlawful child." "Well, go on. What next?" asked the clerk. "Well, sir, though the Simmonses had nothing to give me except a crust now and then, they still let me sleep in the house, for the little jobs I could do for them. But at last Simmons he got work on the railroad away off somewhere, and they all moved away from the city." "And you were left alone?" "Yes, sir. I was left alone in the empty, unfurnished house. Still, it was a shelter, and I was glad of it, and I dreaded the time when it would be rented by another tenant, and I should be turned into the street." "Oh! oh! oh, Lord!" groaned the Major. "But it was never rented again, for the word went around that the whole row was to be pulled down, and so I thought I had leave to stay at least as long as the rats did," continued Capitola, with somewhat of her natural roguish humor twinkling in her dark gray eyes. "But how did you get your bread?" inquired the Recorder. "Did not get it at all, sir. Bread was too dear. I sold my clothes, piece by piece, to the old Jew over the way, and bought corn meal and picked up trash to make a fire, and cooked a little mush every day in an old tin can that had been left behind. And so I lived on for 2 or 3 weeks. And then when my clothes were all gone except the suit I had upon my back, and my meal was almost out, instead of making mush every day, I economized and made gruel." "But, my boy, my good girl, I mean, before you became so destitute you should have found something or other to do," said the Recorder. "Sir, I was trying to get jobs every hour in the day. I'd have done anything honest. I went around to all the houses Granny knew, but they didn't want a girl. Some of the good-natured landlords said if I was a boy, now, they could keep me opening oysters, but as I was a girl they had no work for me. I even went to the offices to get papers to sell, but they told me that crying papers was not proper work for a girl. I even went down to the ferry boats and watched for the passengers coming ashore, and ran and offered to carry their carpet bags or portmanteaus, but some growled at me and others laughed, and one old gentleman asked me if I thought he was a North American Indian to strut up Broadway with a female behind him carrying his pack. And so, sir, while all the ragged boys I knew could get little jobs to earn bread, I, because I was a girl, was not allowed to carry a gentleman's parcel, or black his boots, or shovel the snow off a shopkeeper's pavement, or put in coal, or do anything that I could do just as well as they. And so, because I was a girl, there seemed to be nothing but starvation or beggary before me." "Oh, Lord, that such things should be!" cried Old Hurricane. "That was bad, sir, but there was worse behind. There came a day when my meal, even the last dust of it, was gone. Then I kept life in me by drinking water, and by sleeping all I could. At first I could not sleep for the gnawing in my stomach. But afterwards I slept deeply, from exhaustion, and then I'd dream of feasts and the richest sort of food, and of eating such quantities. And really, sir, I seemed to taste it and enjoy it and get the good of it, almost as much as if it was all true. One morning after such a dream I was waked up by a great noise outside. I staggered upon my feet and crept to the window, and there, sir, were the workmen all outside a pullin' down the house over my head." "Good heaven!" ejaculated Old Hurricane, who seemed to constitute himself the chorus of this drama. "Sir, they didn't know that I or any one was in the empty house. Fright gave me strength to run downstairs and run out. Then I stopped. Oh, I stopped and looked up and down the street. What should I do? The last shelter was gone away from me. The house where I had lived so many years, and that seemed like a friend to me, was falling before my eyes. I thought I'd just go and pitch myself into the river and end it all." "That was a very wicked thought," said the Recorder. "Yes, sir, I know it was, and besides, I was dreadfully afraid of being suffocated in the dirty water around the wharf," said Capitola, with a sparkle of that irrepressible humor that effervesced even through all her trouble. "Well, sir, the hand that feeds young ravens kept me from dying that day. I found a 5-cent piece in the street and resolved not to smother myself in the river mud as long as it lasted. So I bought a muffin, ate it, and went down to the wharf to look for a job. I looked all day but found none, and when night came I went into a lumber yard and hid myself behind a pile of planks that kept the wind off me, and I went to sleep and dreamed a beautiful dream of living in a handsome house, with friends all around me and everything good to eat and drink and wear." "Poor, poor child, but your dream may come true yet," muttered Old Hurricane to himself. "Well, your honor, next day I spent another penny out of my half-dime, and looked in vain for work all day and slept at night in a broken-down omnibus that had happened to be left on the stand. And so, not to tire your patience, a whole week passed by. I lived on my half-dime, spending a penny a day for a muffin until the last penny was gone, and sleeping at night wherever I could, sometimes under the front stoop of a house, sometimes in an old broken carriage, and sometimes behind a pile of boxes on the sidewalk." "That was a dreadful exposure for a young girl," said the Recorder. A burning blush flamed up over the young creature's cheek as she answered, "Yes, sir, that was the worst of all. That finally drove me to putting on boy's clothes." "Let us hear all about it." "Oh, sir, I can't. How can I? Well, being always exposed, sleeping outdoors, I was often in danger from bad boys and bad men," said Capitola, and dropping her head upon her breast and covering her crimson cheeks with her hands, for the first time she burst into tears and sobbed aloud. "Come, come, my little man, my good little woman, I mean, don't take it so to heart. You couldn't help it," said Old Hurricane, with raindrops glittering even in his own stormy eyes. Capitola looked up, with her whole countenance flashing with spirit, and exclaimed, "Oh, but I took care of myself, sir, I did indeed, your honor. You mustn't, either you or the old gentleman, dare to think but what I did." "Oh, of course," said a bystander, laughing. Old Hurricane sprang up, bringing his feet down upon the floor with a resound that made the great hall ring again, exclaiming, "What do you mean by of course, you villain? Demmy, I'll swear she took care of herself, you varlet, and if any man dares to hint otherwise, I'll ram his falsehood down his throat with the point of my walking stick and make him swallow both." "Order, order," said the clerk. Old Hurricane immediately wheeled to the right about, faced and saluted the bench in military fashion, and then said, "Yes, sir, I'll regard order, but in the meanwhile, if the court does not protect this child from insult, I must, order or no order." And with that the old gentleman once more subsided into his seat. "Governor, don't you be so noisy. You'll get yourself stopped up into a jug next. Why, you remind me of an uproarious old fellow poor granny used to talk about, that they called Old Hurricane, because he was so stormy," whispered Capitola, turning toward him. "Humph! She's heard of me, then," muttered the old gentleman to himself. "Well, sir, I mean miss, go on," said the clerk, addressing Capitola. "Yes, sir. Well, your honor, at the end of 5 days, being a certain Thursday morning, when I couldn't get a job of work for love nor money, when my last penny was spent for my last roll, and my last roll was eaten up, and I was dreading the gnawing hunger by day and the horrid perils of the night, I thought to myself if I were only a boy I might carry packages and shovel in coal, and do lots of jobs by day, and sleep without terror by night, and then I felt bitter against fate for not making me a boy. And so, thinking and thinking and thinking, I wandered on until I found myself in Rag Alley, where I used to live, standing right between the pile of broken bricks, plaster and lumber that used to be my home, and the old Jew's shop where I sold my clothes for meal. And then, all of a sudden, a bright thought struck me, and I made up my mind to be a boy." "Made up your mind to be a boy?" "Yes, sir, for it was so easy. I wondered how I came to be so stupid as to not have thought of it before. I just ran across to the old Jew's shop and offered to swap my suit of girl's clothes, that was good though dirty, for any, even the raggedest suit of boy's clothes he had, whether they'd fit me or not, so they would only stay on me. The old fellow put his finger to his nose as if he thought I'd been stealing and wanted to dodge the police. So he took down an old, not very ragged suit that he said would fit me, and opened a door and told me to go into his daughter's room and put 'em on. Well, not to tire your honors, I went into that little back parlor a girl, and I came out a boy, with a suit of pants and jacket, with my hair cut short and a cap on my head. The Jew gave me a penny roll and a sixpence for my black ringlets." "All seemed grist that came to his meal," said Old Hurricane. "Yes, governor, he was a dealer in general. Well, the first thing I did was to hire myself to the Jew, at sixpence a day, and find myself, to shovel in his coal. That didn't take me but a day, so at night the Jew paid me, and I slept in peace behind a stack of boxes. Next morning I was up before the sun, and ran down to the office of the little penny paper, the Morning Star. I bought 2 dozen of 'em, and ran as fast as I could to the ferry boats to sell to the early passengers. Well, sir, in an hour's time I had sold out and pocketed just 2 shillings, and felt myself on the high road to fortune." "And so that was the way by which you came to put yourself in male attire?" "Yes, sir, and the only thing that made me feel sorry was to see what a fool I had been not to turn to a boy before, when it was so easy. And from that day forth I was happy and prosperous. I found plenty to do. I carried carpet bags, held horses, put in coal, cleaned sidewalks, blacked gentlemen's boots, and did everything an honest lad could turn his hand to. And so for more'n a year I was as happy as a king, and should have kept on so, only I forgot and let my hair grow, and instead of cutting it off, just tucked it up under my cap. And so this morning on the ferry boat, in a high breeze, the wind blowed off my cap and the policeman blowed on me." "'Twasn't altogether her long hair, your honor, for I had seen her before, having known her when she lived with old Mrs. Grewell in Rag Alley," interrupted the officer. "You may sit down, my child," said the Recorder, in a tone of encouragement. CHAPTER VII.